The United Nations needs to reform itself. That's been the message from many here in Munich. The organisation agrees. But at the same time, in a world of expanding crises, lots more say it is needed now more than ever, especially when it comes to the future of Gaza. I sat down with the UN's development programme head ahead of an upcoming trip to Gaza to talk about what that looks like and more. Thank you, Mr. de Croo, for joining me. You haven't been long in this role. When you started, were you hit by the scale of the challenge ahead? Because according to this year's report, the world, as we can see, is experiencing so many simultaneous wars, crises.
Well, I started December 1st. What you just described has actually been coming for some time. For some time, we've seen that instability has increased through the world. We've seen that at the same time, well, at least the public investment in fighting crisis, in funding development has gone down in quite a dramatic way. So yes, before starting, I knew it was going to be a turbulent environment, but also an environment where there is quite some opportunity to adapt to that new world. And my perspective is that in that changing world, the development way of doing needs to change, and we are ready to do that.
And you said on earlier this month that conflict is spreading faster than diplomacy, and you said this is something that has been coming for some time. How has we reached such a point?
To me, it's a symptom of the fact that we are moving into a multipolar world, where the spheres of power and the spheres of influence, there's way more than before. And reordering the world has not yet adapted to that new reality. There is quite some criticism towards the multilateral system. I think some of that criticism, we have to take it serious. Yes, the UN needs to be faster, needs to be more efficient, needs to be present in those places where it makes a difference. Now, part of that criticism is really axed to the peace and security pillar, to the Security Council, which has some difficulties to function. That's been an understatement. On the development side, we actually have a pretty performant way of working. The last 25 years, the progress in human development is unseen. I mean, extreme poverty has been halved. Child mortality has been halved, but the cuts that we see now in public spending, they have an impact. When I talk about child mortality decreasing, yes, 25 years in a row it has been decreasing. Last year it picked up again. Why did it pick up? Well, because there's less funding for vaccination. And when you stop vaccination, especially in fragile countries, it has an immediate impact on child mortality. So the cuts that we see, people feel them, and it's the most vulnerable who do feel them.
It seems like you and many of your colleagues here in Munich accept that reform is needed. But how do you go about reform when you have, for example, Mike Waltz here saying the UN needs to go on a diet, make the United Nations great again, pulling that funding? How do you go about reform when the funding is so significantly cut like that?
Well, when you are a bit with your back against the wall, and there's no denying that large part of the UN are, it's an additional motivator to adapt and to change. And part of the analysis that has been made, I agree. I mean, over the last decades, the UN has grown into so many different entities with overlapping mandates, and that element of reducing the number of agencies that are active, making very clear on what their mandate is, and being also very clear towards who are financing the UN. I mean, the UN is a membership organization. We work with the financing that we get of the member states. We have to be much more responsive to what the expectations of those member states are, and to make clear that we are able to deliver on those. I've been in conversation with Mike Waltz 2 weeks ago, That was a great conversation in really understanding, okay, what are the things that you're looking for? One of the things that the Americans put forward is a pro-business approach. I said, well, welcome here. I mean, making the world a place where private investment can take place, where local entrepreneurship can thrive. This is one of the best ways of creating development, of pushing the outcomes of people's life forward. So it's, I think you have to listen to the criticism, but also be very clear on what you have to offer.
But then on the other side, you have, for example, the Chinese foreign minister today saying that the problem doesn't lie with the United Nations. The problem lies with countries amplifying differences and disagreements, and that it comes down to an erosion of trust, which you, of course, have said as well. This is fundamentally linked to trust. But how do you resolve that when you have countries like the United States increasingly going it alone, the most powerful leader of the world's largest economy, changing his mind day after day?
Well, the United Nations has always been a place where conflicting opinions meet. I mean, this is the core of what we do. So, seeing that there's differences in opinion, that doesn't scare me. I mean, that even increases the value of what we do. Now, yes, working in that turbulent environment, look, that's not new to us. What is important, I think, in for example, here at the Munich Security Conference, which is a place where traditionally the discussion was about power, was about military spending, was about how do you stabilize the world with a typical view on security. To me, that's only half of the story. You cannot drone yourself out of every problem in the world. You can have military might, but if institutions are collapsing, if your young population has no job, if your population sees no future, you just continue creating the basis for fragility. And that is the message that I think the United Nations needs to give. Say, look, increase in military spending, we respect that and we understand where it comes from. But if you are not complementing it also with what I would say is the real preemptive strike, military people often talk about a preemptive strike to avoid a conflict. To me, the real preemptive strike is investing in development. And this is something we're actually quite good at.
Okay, let's talk about Gaza, because you met with the Palestinian Prime Minister in Davos. You agreed that lasting peace in Gaza and rebuilding development foundations for Palestinians across the occupied territory is a top priority for you and your organisation. We saw Palestinians freezing to death this winter in waterlogged tents. We saw them bombed despite a ceasefire. How can you rebuild in this environment, and even in the West Bank, where we see Israeli settlements expanding every day?
It's heartbreaking to see what is still happening despite the ceasefire. The living circumstances of the inhabitants of Gaza have actually not improved, and UNDP is active there. We are unfortunately today really doing the basics of the basics. I mean, we build tents, not enough of them. We provide water, and we remove debris. And if we continue at the current speed, it will take us 7 years before everything's removed. So we really need to speed it up, to scale that up. We are capable of doing it. We also know that many countries in the region, for example Turkey, is able to do much more once, of course, there's a political consensus on that, and once access is being provided. From that perspective, we are looking forward to next week. Next week there is the Board of Peace in Washington, but next to that there is also a reconstruction conference. Anything that opens up the space for an organization like ours to be more active is the right way forward. But next to what I just described, you also need to disarm. You also need to make clear that Hamas cannot play any role in the leadership of Gaza. I mean, it's not just rebuilding. You also need to work on those factors that have led to the instability.
Well, so let's talk about that, because next week, as you've mentioned, the Peace Board meets for the first time. First of all, are you planning to work with the Peace Board?
we will work with anyone who makes it able for us to be more active. I mean, our goal is to help people who are, as you described, really in the most horrendous circumstances. We are quite open to that. The Peace Board is based on a Security Council resolution related to Gaza. As the Secretary General said, look, we welcome that. We just hope that after the announcement, and this has now been a couple of weeks ago, we can finally get going. And probably that will be UN organizations, that will probably might be other organizations as well. Look, at this point, the needs are so broad that anyone who could help should help.
So what does the reconstruction of Gaza look like for you and your organization?
Well, priority number one is to provide infrastructure, to provide systems for the 2.2 million people of Gaza. That can only work if you also have some Gazan and some Palestinian leadership. So to us, these are really the conditions. The priority are the people of Gaza. If next to that, other types of investment would take place, who are we to judge? I mean, that's up to the local communities to decide. But the priority should be the current inhabitants, and you cannot have reconstruction if the people of Palestine or Gaza don't have a say in it, if they don't have a leadership in it. And as I said before, next to buildings, you will also have to re-establish education systems, healthcare systems, a governance model.
Okay, and my final question, according to this year's Munich Security Report, even though the actual costs of global warming are rapidly increasing, the share of respondents who perceive extreme weather and forest fires and climate change as imminent risks to their country has been declining. How worrying is that?
So there's another study that was presented in Davos, which basically compares people's short-term concerns and their longer-term concerns. And there you also saw that the short-term concern on the impact of climate change has gone down, but the longer-term concern on climate change actually has gone up. And that, I think, is an interesting element. Yes, I think today, no surprise, I mean, insecurity, energy prices, cost of living is quite high. But the global population understands that the threat of climate change on our way of living is a real one. And that study is called the Edelman study, which I think, again, confirms that acting on climate change is the necessary thing to do, but it's also something which is supported by the public.
Mr. de Croo, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.